Hello friends, I'm Kaylyn and welcome to the BUgirl channel. We are talking about some fantastic women from the Bible, and today we're talking about one of my very favorites, Ruth. Just like Esther, Ruth actually has her own book in the Bible, and it's called Ruth. It's only 4 chapters long, so it's definitely really quick and easy to read. Let's talk about Ruth's story and 3 things we can learn from her. This story actually starts off with a couple named Naomi and Elimelech, who moved with their 2 sons to the country of Moab because there was a famine in their own land. They lived in Moab for 10 years, and in those 10 years, the 2 sons married 2 women. One of those women was Ruth. Now, unfortunately, Elimelech and the 2 sons end up dying. So Naomi, alone with her 2 daughters-in-law and in a country that was not her own, decided to leave Moab and move back to Bethlehem. At first, both daughters-in-law went with Naomi. But along the way, Naomi turned to them and told them to go back to their mothers. She said that she hoped God would bless each one of them so richly because of the way they were so good to her sons and so good to her. Both girls resisted at first, saying they wanted to go with her. But Naomi insisted and said that she had nothing to offer them. No more sons to marry, no husband to protect and provide for them all. One of the daughters cried and hugged Naomi goodbye and then headed back home. But Ruth refused to leave. She said, "Don't force me to leave you. Don't make me go home. Where you go, I go. And where you live, I'll live. Your people are my people. Your God is my God. Where you die, I'll die. And that's where I'll be buried. So help me God. Not even death itself is going to come between us." When Naomi saw that Ruth had her heart set on going, she gave in and the 2 women made their way to Bethlehem. Once they arrived, they were the talk of the town. People couldn't believe that Naomi was back and that she had brought a foreigner with her. Now at this time, Naomi was pretty depressed. She truly felt like God had failed her and that he had destined her for a life of misery. But Ruth was determined. She made a plan that she would go and work in the nearby fields. She would follow along after a harvester and pick up whatever leftover barley there was, and she'd take it back to Naomi so that she could provide food for the 2 of them. She worked extremely hard at this, all day and all night with hardly any breaks. Eventually, she ended up in a part of a field that was owned by her former father-in-law's relative, whose name was Boaz. When Boaz noticed Ruth, he asked the foreman who she was. The foreman explained that she was the Moabite woman who had come back to Bethlehem with Naomi, that she had asked permission to pick up the leftover harvest, and that she had been working extremely hard. Boaz went to Ruth and said, "Listen, my daughter, from now on, don't go to any other field to glean. Stay right here in this one, and stay close to my young women. Watch where they're harvesting and follow them. And don't worry about a thing. I've given orders to my servants not to harass you. When you get thirsty, feel free to go and drink from the water buckets that the servants have filled." When Ruth heard this, she was overcome with emotion. She dropped to her knees and asked why he would be so kind to someone he didn't even know, to someone who was a foreigner. Boaz said that he had heard how kind she had been to Naomi, and how she had left her entire family to protect her. He said that God would surely bless and protect her. Boaz provided lunch and water for Ruth, and he even told his workers to let her pick up barley where there was still plenty left. He told them to make it easy for her, to give her special treatment. By the end of the day, Ruth had a full sack of barley. She took it back to Naomi. Naomi asked what field she had gotten all of this barley from. Ruth told her about Boaz and how kind he had been to her. Naomi was incredibly happy and said, "Why, God bless that man. God hasn't quite walked out on us after all. He still loves us, in bad times as well as good." Naomi's hope was beginning to be restored. Ruth continued to work in Boaz's field among the other young women there. Then one day, Naomi said perhaps it was time she secure a good home for Ruth so that she could have a happy life. She said that Boaz was one of the men that could marry Ruth because he was a relative of Elimelech. She instructed Ruth on what to do according to the customs of that time. Ruth was to go to Boaz while he slept on the threshing room floor, which is where they kept their grain, and sleep at his feet. This custom was to show that she was available for marriage. She was then to wait for Boaz's response. Boaz woke up in the middle of the night and noticed that someone was there. He asked who it was. Ruth said that it was her, and that she was available for marriage should he want to marry her. Boaz was honored that she would choose him, and he ultimately accepted. They got married and gave birth to a son named Obed. From this lineage, after many years, came Jesus, our Savior. Now let's talk about the 3 things that we can learn from Ruth. Number 1, don't let your past hold you back. If we look at Ruth's past, there are a number of things that could have held her back from moving to Bethlehem with Naomi. She was from Moab, which was a place that the Israelites frowned upon. She had no husband to take care of her or provide for her, and she was quite possibly not able to have any children, seeing as how she was with her husband for quite a number of years and they never had a child. All of these things wouldn't set her up for a very successful life in Bethlehem. But she didn't allow those things to hold her back. She still had hope for the future. The same goes for us today. We have a hope and a future and a purpose no matter what our past looks like. Number 2, be full of faith. Now, it seems that Ruth was a fairly new believer. In Moab, people worship different pagan gods, so we can only assume that that's how Ruth was raised. But upon marrying one of Naomi's sons, her eyes were open to the one true God. Now that she believed in God, she didn't want to go back to the way that her life was before. She was willing to uproot her entire life to move to Bethlehem with Naomi. She was fully committed to her faith in God. She said, "Your people are my people. Your God is my God." We even see that Ruth had faith that God would provide a future for both of them, even when Naomi couldn't see it. And what a bright future it ended up to be. Ruth ended up being the great, I don't know how many greats, however many you want to throw in there, grandmother of Jesus. Have faith that God is always with us and that He has a plan for us. Number 3, develop great character. Character is who you are when no one else is watching. Ruth had no clue that anyone was watching her. And she definitely had no clue that her story was going to be recorded for millions of people to read. She just did what she thought was good and right. She showed so much love and respect for Naomi, more than would have been expected of her at that time. She worked hard in those fields to provide for Naomi and herself, and she proved herself a woman of integrity with Boaz. Let's take note from Ruth and strive to do what is good and right, to have great character, no matter if someone is looking or not. That's it for this week, friends. Make sure you go and read the whole book of Ruth so that you can get the entire story. Let's remember all of the wonderful things that we can learn from Ruth, who was a strong and capable and faithful woman of God.